March 1944, Central Texas. Morning light spreads slowly across rows of wooden barracks as the wind carries the smell of dust and cooked food. Inside a fenced compound far from the front lines, German prisoners of war rise from their bunks to the sound of a bell. There is no artillery, no aircraft overhead, no shouted orders from the battlefield. Instead, there is the clatter of tin trays, boots on gravel, and the steady rhythm of routine. For many of these men, breakfast will include something they have not seen regularly in years: meat. This quiet moment inside an American prison camp captures one of the most startling and emotionally disruptive experiences German soldiers would face during the war. Captured after years of rationing, hunger, and scarcity, they found themselves in enemy hands, but eating better than they had at home, better even than their families under Allied bombing. It was not what they expected, and it changed how they understood the war. By 1943 and 1944, Germany was fighting a total war under conditions of increasing deprivation. Allied bombing had disrupted transportation and food distribution. Livestock herds shrank. Civilian rations declined steadily. Meat, once a staple, became rare. Soldiers at the front lived on ersatz substitutes, thin soups, and bread stretched with fillers. Hunger was a constant companion. German soldiers were taught to expect brutality if captured, especially by enemies they had been warned were vengeful or uncivilized. Propaganda painted captivity as humiliation, starvation, and abuse. Surrender, they were told, meant disgrace and suffering. What they encountered in American camps contradicted nearly everything they had been taught. Under the Geneva Convention of 1929, the United States committed to feeding prisoners the same rations issued to its own troops, adjusted for labor requirements. This was not a gesture of kindness. It was policy, law, and capacity. American military planners had built a logistical system capable of feeding millions of soldiers, civilians, and prisoners alike. By the height of the war, more than 370,000 German POWs were held in camps across the United States, from the Southwest to the Midwest and Southeast. Camps such as Camp Swift and Camp Shelby became temporary homes for men who had marched across Europe and North Africa. Daily life in these camps followed a strict routine: roll call, work assignments, meals, recreation, and at the center of it all was food. American rations were built around abundance. Industrial-scale agriculture, uninterrupted supply lines, and mechanized processing ensured consistent quality and quantity. POWs received meat regularly: beef, pork, sometimes chicken, served in stews, roasts, or ground into patties. For German prisoners accustomed to grams of meat per week, this was shocking. Letters and memoirs repeatedly mention the same detail: meat almost every day. At first, many prisoners distrusted it. Some suspected propaganda or temporary indulgence. Others feared it would be taken away. But the meals continued, day after day. The bell rang. The trays filled. The meat appeared. The recurring symbol of this experience was the mess hall tray. Heavy, dented, unremarkable, it carried not only food but an unspoken comparison. On one side of the ocean, German civilians survived on turnips and ration cards. On the other, captured enemy soldiers ate better than they ever had during the war. This contrast produced discomfort as much as relief. German POWs expected captivity to confirm everything they had been told about American cruelty and decadence. Instead, it exposed something else entirely: capacity. The ability to sustain war without starving its own people or its prisoners. American guards rarely spoke ideology. They enforced rules, issued orders, and served meals. But the system itself spoke clearly. Democracy, whatever its flaws, had produced a society capable of feeding enemies while fighting a global war. This realization unsettled many prisoners. Some felt gratitude, others felt shame. Many felt confusion. The simple act of eating meat daily forced questions that propaganda could not easily silence. Why could the enemy afford this? Why could Germany not? Historical records and post-war interviews show that food became one of the most powerful influences on POW perceptions, not because it was luxurious, but because it was consistent. Hunger had taught German soldiers that scarcity was inevitable. The American camps suggested otherwise. Work details reinforced this impression. POWs labored on farms, in canneries, and on infrastructure projects. They saw warehouses full, fields harvested efficiently, trucks moving without interruption. Food was not hoarded, it flowed. The ideological impact was gradual, not immediate. POWs did not abandon beliefs overnight. But the certainty that Germany was fighting a superior moral and material system eroded steadily. The war began to look less like a struggle for survival, and more like a mismatch of capacity. For some prisoners, the experience carried guilt. Families at home were hungry. Cities were burning. Yet here, behind barbed wire, meat appeared daily. Letters home were censored, but the knowledge remained. The meat ration became more than nourishment. It became evidence. By 1945, as the war ended, and prisoners prepared for repatriation, many carried this memory with them, not as humiliation, but as revelation. The enemy they had been taught to despise had demonstrated restraint, organization, and abundance under pressure. The epilogue of this experience lies beyond the camps. Many former POWs later acknowledged that captivity in the United States altered how they understood the war and its outcome. It did not erase responsibility or guilt, but it forced honesty. The truth revealed in American prison camps was quiet and uncelebrated. It arrived 3 times a day, on a tray. Abundance, when paired with rules and restraint, proved more persuasive than force alone. The ability to feed even captured enemies became a demonstration of what kind of system would shape the post-war world. And for German POWs, the daily meat ration became a symbol they never forgot. Not of indulgence, but of a reality their nation could no longer deny. The longer German prisoners remained inside American camps, the more ordinary the extraordinary became. Meat stopped being a shock and became routine. That routine, more than any speech or pamphlet, carried its own quiet power. It normalized abundance in a way propaganda never could. For many prisoners, the psychological effect unfolded slowly. In the early weeks of captivity, gratitude dominated, hunger receded, bodies regained weight, illness linked to malnutrition faded. But as physical relief settled in, mental dissonance grew. The questions that surfaced were not shouted. They lingered. German soldiers had been conditioned to see the war as a struggle against encirclement and deprivation imposed by hostile powers. Scarcity was explained as necessity, sacrifice, proof of endurance. Yet here, inside the territory of the enemy, scarcity did not exist in the same way. The barbed wire enclosed men, but beyond it stretched fields, rail lines, and supply depots that functioned without visible strain. American camps were not luxurious. Barracks were simple, discipline was strict, but food was adequate, predictable, and often plentiful. The daily meat ration stood in sharp contrast to what prisoners remembered from the front and what they feared was happening at home. Historical records from the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps show that POW rations were carefully calculated to meet caloric needs comparable to those of American soldiers. Meat formed a central component because it was abundant within the American supply system. Beef production in the United States during the war remained high, supported by mechanized agriculture, refrigerated transport, and protected shipping lanes. This system did not collapse under pressure. It expanded. For German POWs assigned to agricultural labor, the lesson was reinforced daily. They worked alongside American farmers who harvested vast yields with modern equipment. Grain silos were full. Livestock was managed systematically. Waste was minimal. Efficiency replaced desperation. Many prisoners recorded in diaries and later memoirs that the sight of food abundance unsettled them more than guard towers ever did. Hunger had been a constant presence in their military lives. It had shaped morale, endurance, and obedience. In American camps, hunger lost its power. The emotional contrast deepened as news filtered in from Europe. Bombed cities. Reduced rations. Disrupted harvests. Families surviving on substitutes. The knowledge that captivity offered more reliable nourishment than freedom at home produced a complicated mix of relief and guilt. Some prisoners struggled with resentment, others with shame, a few with reluctant admiration. The meat ration became a recurring reference point in post-war testimonies, not because it was extravagant, but because it was consistent. Consistency implied planning. Planning implied foresight. Foresight implied a system capable of sustaining not only war but recovery. This realization mattered. American camp authorities understood that humane treatment served strategic purposes. Compliance with the Geneva Convention protected American prisoners abroad. It also reduced resistance within camps and supported labor programs essential to wartime agriculture and infrastructure. But beyond these practical considerations, the camps unintentionally became demonstrations of a different social order. The guards did not lecture prisoners about democracy. The menus did. 3 meals a day, delivered on time, enforced without favoritism, created an environment where rules mattered more than ideology. Prisoners observed that even enemies were bound by regulation. That discipline was procedural, not personal. That power operated through systems rather than terror. For German soldiers raised in a culture of command and obedience, this distinction was significant. Authority in the camps felt impersonal but predictable. Punishments followed violations, not moods. Privileges were granted according to compliance, not loyalty. The structure was firm, but not arbitrary. Over time, this affected how prisoners interpreted defeat. Loss no longer meant collapse into chaos. It meant transition into a different order, one that appeared capable of feeding former enemies while rebuilding itself. The symbolic weight of meat intensified toward the end of the war. As Germany surrendered in May 1945, POWs understood that the world they would return to was shattered. Cities lay in ruins. Food shortages persisted. Rationing would continue for years. The memory of American camps, by contrast, became a reference for what was possible. Repatriation did not erase these impressions. Many former POWs later acknowledged that their experience in American camps influenced their acceptance of post-war reconstruction and cooperation. It did not absolve responsibility. It did not rewrite guilt, but it reframed expectations. The daily meat ration had shown them that scarcity was not inevitable, that organization, productivity, and restraint could sustain populations even under strain. In this sense, the camps served as quiet classrooms, not of ideology, but of capacity. The epilogue of this experience lies in the broader post-war world. The same industrial and agricultural systems that fed prisoners would feed Europe through aid and reconstruction. The same logistical networks that delivered meat to camps would deliver supplies to devastated cities. Abundance, when paired with rules, would shape peace as decisively as it had shaped war. For the German POWs who lived behind American wire, this lesson arrived without ceremony. It came on dented trays, carried by routine, enforced by regulation. It was not generosity that made the deepest impression, but reliability. And long after the camps were dismantled, many remembered that moment, not when they were captured, not when the war ended, but when they realized that the enemy could afford to feed them well every day without exception. That realization lingered, because it revealed a truth that would define the post-war era, that the future would belong not to those who could endure hunger the longest, but to those who could organize abundance and apply it with restraint. References: United States War Department, Prisoner of War Operations, Mackenzie, S. PPPA did, Teute German du Feigtid. The Treatment of Prisoners of War in World War II, University of Chicago Press. Kramer, Arnold, Nazi Prisoners of War in America, Stein and Day, US-du Norregte, Unlaw Bernards-du, Army Quartermaster Corps Records, 1943, 1945. Geneva Convention relative to the treatment of prisoners of war, 1929.